Today we shall discuss the language and literature under Mughal India. India, as we all know, is a multilingual country with many different languages and dialectics. It is not possible at this stage to speak on all the languages and dialectics. What we'll do is, we'll make a selection on the basis of the literature prevalent at that particular time. India, under the Mughals, had three particular languages which were more or less spread all over the Mughal Empire: Arabic, Persian and Sanskrit. In these, Arabic was much less known. This was mainly used for inscriptions, sometimes in the coins as well. Persian was the most used language, and Sanskrit was there in pre-Mughal or rather pre-Sultanate India, but with the coming of the Turks and the Afghans, the Sanskrit language declined quite considerably. In the pre-Sultanate period, that is pre-13th century, there were certain areas which were quite famous for Sanskrit, which we would see first today. Bihar, Kashmir was most important, Gujarat as well, and to a certain extent other places like Varanasi, etc. It is stated generally that the Turks and Afghans had destroyed the Sanskrit language and destroyed the Hindu culture at the same time. This was a British view which had continued for some time, and some of the Indian historians like Haraprasad Shastri had accepted this. But if we look at the output of the Sanskrit during the Mughal period, we would see not only the Mughals had been patrons of Sanskrit literature, some of them wrote in Sanskrit as well, but they did not try to destroy the Sanskrit language as such, or the Sanskrit literature as such. As a matter of fact, there were other very valid reasons for the decline of Sanskrit, to which we would come later. When we come to the Mughal period, in the early Mughal days in the 16th century, we see that South India was still quite well known for Sanskrit patronage, and Sanskrit literature still flourished in some of the Hindu courts. But under the Mughals, we see also that Sanskrit output was going on. There was what is known as Shlesh Kabba, the poems with double or even triple meanings, but this was mostly prevalent in South India. In northern India, the one type that was quite famous was historical literature. For example, in Western India, Kobindra Paramacharya wrote the biography of Shivaji. He was a contemporary of Shivaji. His son, Govinda Datta, and his grandson also, Dev Datta, they also wrote on the sons of Shivaji, Shambhuji and others. So there was a tradition of historical literature continuing in the Mughal period, may not be under their direct patronage, but certainly under their influence. There were others like Pragya Bhatto and others who wrote on other kings, etc. Now, apart from the historical literature, there were other kinds of Sanskrit literature. For example, Jairam Pandey wrote on the poets assembled at the court of Shahaji, Shivaji's father. And there were others also who wrote on different poets, wrote on different type of literature. But gradually, the principal trend was to write either on the bhaktis or on the Puranas. The Puranic episodes became quite popular. Now in these Puranic episodes and in these other things, we see that the historical literature still flourished in a different sense. For example, in the pre-Sultanate India and Kashmir, there was the Kalhan's Raj Tarangini, and the tradition continued in the Mughal period. There were at least two scholars who wrote on the basis of Raj Tarangini, the type of Raj Tarangini, the type of historical literature. There was one who wrote on the conquest of Kashmir by Akbar. So, on the whole, we see that the historical literature continued in some form or the other, despite the fact that the Bhakti and the Puranic episodes created a star among the scholars and the poets. Apart from this, there was another type of Sanskrit literature called eulogistic poems. For example, the court poet of Bikaner, king of Bikaner, Karan Singh, and his son Anup Singh, these court poets wrote their biographies. But there were others who were not in the courts as such, but they still write. For example, Pandit Jagannath wrote on Asaf Khan, who was the patron, and he named it as Asaf Bilas. There was another one who wrote, Pandit Jagadaban, who wrote on Darashiko. Darashiko himself wrote a Sanskrit poem, eulogistic poem, praising Nrisingha Acharya of Varanasi. So there were these kind of interaction between the different communities so far as Sanskrit literature is concerned, particularly during this Mughal period. There were also other type of literature, fictional literature, literature with play, with drama. For example, the drama was quite popular. In Bengal also we find in Navadvip, Kavi Karnapur wrote a drama on the biography of Chaitanya. So therefore, there were one-act plays also which were patronized by the king. Now, these kind of Sanskrit writings, different types of writings, in one sense, it freed the literature from the clutches of both Bhakti and the Puranas, but it was not totally secular as such. One cannot call it really the secular one. So therefore, what we see that despite the popular saying that the Sanskrit has declined, it has certainly become very artificial, there is no doubt about it, but the variety of the Sanskrit literature had remained throughout the Mughal Empire and as well as in different parts of Mughal Empire. After Sanskrit we might start Hindi, which was fairly popular among the people in northern India. The best writer was Goswami Tulsidas, whom I all know, who wrote in 1574 Ramcharitmanas. Ramcharitmanas, one of the most popular writings on Ram by anyone, by any scholar of India. Now Ramcharitmanas has certain Brajo Bhasha. It was not exactly modern Hindi. The certain Brajo Bhasha included. But in later times, some of the words had been altered. But still, it remained Hindi. It was the early Hindi with Braja Bhasha, and sometimes with Khari Boli, what is known as the old Delhi Hindi. So it was in a way different from the modern Hindi as such. Tulsidas was a very orthodox Brahmin, followed the devotion of Ram, as we all know, wrote this beautiful piece. He was followed by many other equally important people. One was Mirabai, who died around 1548, and she was a princess of Mewar who married another Rajput prince, became widow, then surrendered herself to Krishna and sang devotional songs in love of Krishna. Her melodious voice and her devotion made her a celebrity of her own time. This was in original Marwari language, which was different from the Hindi, but it has been altered to Hindi as such. There was one more called Surdas, who was also very famous and who wrote on the poems of Krishna, Krishna Leela, etc. Now, best known poem of Hindi is Padmavat, written by Malik Muhammad Jaisi during the reign of Akbar, on the affair of Alauddin Khalji and Padmini of Chittor. Now, this is an allegorical writing. Allegorical in the sense, this is not exactly history. Malik Muhammad Jaisi, who wrote in Brajo Bhasha, not in Persian, he was writing nearly 150 years after the event. And now it has been proved, actually it has been proved in 1934 by Professor Ojha of Bihar, that the entire episode is imaginary. There was no one called Padmini, and therefore the contemporary poet Amir Khusro, who accompanied Alauddin Khalji, never mentioned it. There was no contemporary mention of Padmini as such. But whatever the merit of the historicity, the fact remains that it was written in a beautiful style, and Malik Muhammad Jaisi was certainly one of the most important medieval poets of his days. This was translated in Bengali in the late 17th century in the court of Arakan, and it has been published both in Bengali as well as in Brajo Bhasha. Punjabi, if we come next to Hindi, we see that Adi Grantha was compiled under the order of the fifth Guru, Guru Arjan, in 1604. It was written in pure Punjabi, the earliest Punjabi. And the advantage is that because of the order of the Guru, the words could not be changed at all. So therefore, the 1604 edition had remained exactly as it is. There was no change in this. Now, Adi Granth, we all know, is the book of the Gurus, of the devotion, of the attributes of the Creator. It was a religious book. which was revered by all the Sikhs of Punjab and elsewhere. Apart from Adi Grantha, there was another one called Janam Sakha, which was the sayings of Guru Nanak. There was only one copy existing in the British Museum. This was published in 1885, and this is also remained in this kind of form, although gradually one could see that from the Adi Granth onwards there was a mixture of Arabic and Persian words for some time. Sometimes the terms of Hindu yogic practices were also included. But the Punjabi literature has one extremely important step, that it has some secular literature along with it. A poet called Damodar Gulati wrote the story of Hira and Ranja, the tragedy. And he claimed that he was a witness to most of the events, which is doubtful, wrote during the time of Akbar. But this was followed by another one who wrote this on the same theme, Waris Shah, who also wrote the tragedy of Hira and Ranja. So there was a secular literature growing in the Punjabi literature, then now fully developed into Punjabi, and one could see some of the Sufi poets were writing on different parts of religion. Gujarat was once famous for literature. Bahalim translated Ramayana in Gujarati, and there were certain others who also wrote on either on the Bhakti or on the Puranic episodes. These are the two most important themes that the Gujarati poets had used. But sometimes they had used many Hindi words. As a matter of fact, Hindi was never totally forgotten. Sometimes the Persian words are also included. Among the important writers were Miraben and Mehta, who wrote Narottam Mehta, who wrote on Gujarati but with Hindi words mixing in it, mainly on the devotion, mainly on the Krishna Leela, a devotee of Krishna. This was the personal story of Krishna's life in the Vrindavan, the pastoral life, one could say, on the bank of the Jamuna, his plays with the maids and etc. But other types were there coming up, not very secular, but in more or less in literature, in literary form. There was always a conflict, not a violent one of course, between the Hindu Puranic episodes and the Bhakti cult. Neither of these two was totally subsumed by the others, and both continued to form part of the Gujarati literature. There is a difference between Sanskrit, Hindi and Gujarati literature in the Mughal days. In the Sanskrit literature, we find very strong influence of historical literature. As I have mentioned, Komendra Paramacharya wrote on Shahaji. There were certain others who wrote on his son, his grandson, etc. wrote on the sons of Shivaji as well. There was also one on Raja Ram. In Hindi, what is interesting is that in the court of Akbar, many courtiers used to write in Hindi. For example, Abdul Rahim Khani Khanan, son of Bairam Khan, he wrote Hindi poems apart from the Persian poet. He was a very good poet and he wrote at least 17 Hindi poems, many of which had been translated. Birbal used to write in Hindi, naturally it is understood. Tansen used to write in Hindi as well. But in the Gujarati, we do not find any such writings. Even we do not find the court poets or historical literature. In Hindi, the influence of the historical literature of Sanskrit is there. For example, Bihari Lal wrote on Raja Jai Singh in Hindi. Lal Kabi wrote on Chhatrasal Bundela, which was very accurate and has been used by the historians many times. But in Gujarati, we do not have this kind of thing. We Gujarati have an exceptional kind. For example, we have one poet called Akho, A-K-H-O, Akho. He was working in the Royal Mint at Gujarat. He was accused of embezzlement of gold. He was imprisoned. When he left the prison, he went to Varanasi, studied Vedanta for almost 10 years, and then wrote in the language of the people the entire Vedanta philosophy. Now this kind of attempt was rather rare in the literature under the Mughals. Generally there had been writings on Vedanta or writings on Ramayana, but these are for the erudite scholars, often with notations. But in case of Akho, this was simply not there. So therefore, although the language and the literature of the different periods, of the different regions were coming up, but the development was not a linear one in that sense. That is a straight path. It went through different experiments, influenced by some others, influenced to some extent to a great extent by the Bhakti cult and the Puranas, etc. This could be seen in Navadvip, in the rise of the Nobunai literature, new logic literature, which actually has started from the early 16th century before the coming of the Mughals, and actually before that even. But it continued during the 16th century, and it became very artificial in the sense that it became a mere juggling of words instead of the inner meaning and the content which was there in a much great depth in earlier period. But in Navadvip one could see that Sanskrit was still being taught. In Varanasi this was also the same. It's still being taught. But in Varanasi, this Nobunai, this logic of the grammar, the logic of the logic, this was not there that much. One or two scholars were there, but not more. In Navadvip they flourished. And they flourished because of various reasons with which we are not concerned today.